Right, welcome everybody to the last Discourses video that I'm going to be doing this summer. And this one, hard on the heels of the last one, which was a bit of a mammoth video about how to tackle the English language paper 2 question 3. This one is a shorter one, and this one is about writing an opinion article in the exam. So this is your question 4, and you've got sort of 45 minutes or so at the back end of paper 2 in order to do this. And the wording of the question is, write an opinion article about, and then it's the topic of the 2 articles which you've analysed on question 3, in which you assess the ideas and issues raised in text A and B and argue your own views. So this has got 2 AOs. It's assessed for 2 things. Principally, it's AO2. So unlike question 3, which didn't have any AO2 in it, this is where you integrate into your article linguistic concepts, theories and research. So it's exactly the sort of stuff that you did on the section A when you were writing an essay about language diversity or language change. The nuggets of knowledge that you were including in that essay are exactly the same nuggets of knowledge which you're including in this article. So 2/3 of the mark is for the AO2, and the other third for 10 marks is for creativity. So it's your ability to communicate the ideas in a creative and journalistic style. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about approaches towards this question 4. Before you begin, you need to get a hold on what are those linguistic concepts and theories which you are going to integrate into your arguments. Obviously, you can't just make it up as you go along. You need to be working to a formula. You need to have planned beforehand 6, 7 or 8 different sort of linguistic ideas, concepts that you're going to be explaining in your article. Okay, and the AO2 stuff will be material that's taken either from the language diversity or the language change topics that you've studied so far. Okay, so you need to be prepared before you start. Obviously, the article that you write is responding to the 2 articles that you've just analysed in question 3. So you're having to address some of those ideas, but be warned, because it's not an analysis, again, of the articles. You've already done that, so there clearly wouldn't be any point in doing that. And you have to assume that your reader hasn't read those 2 articles. So you need to sort of briefly refer to them before you develop your own ideas on the topic. The worst thing that you can do is keep referring to text A and text B, because that's only the sort of thing that you do in an essay, and you wouldn't do that if you were writing an article, let's say for Huffington Post, where you couldn't make any assumptions that your reader had read these 2 articles that you've referred to. Okay, and in terms of your audience, your implied audience, they are well-educated readers. They've got this interest in language topics because that's why they're reading your article, but they're not linguistic specialists, i.e. they're not somebody who's taking necessarily an English language A-level, or they're not linguistic undergraduates. So what you need to be doing is you need to be communicating linguistic information in a really accessible way, not patronising them, not dumbing down, but just giving credence to the idea that they are not experts on the subject. Okay, so before you start, you need to think, what knowledge, what concepts are you going to be delivering? Now think back to the question 3 material that we were doing last time, the articles that went accents aren't always acceptable, and the super user piece as well by Queen of Fern. So what possible AO2 knowledge from those articles would you include in your question 4? I would advise you to stop the tape there and on a piece of paper just throw down 5, 6, 7 different theories or concepts that you think would be relevant to those articles. Right, so I'll talk through some of the ideas that I could think of that I think relate in some way. First of all, prescriptivism versus descriptivism. we talked on the question 3 how both of those articles are pretty much on the prescriptive side of the element, i.e. they are judgmental about language and they're making assumptions about people based on the language they're using. So prescriptivism could form quite an interesting part of your article. Also, you could be looking at the difference between accent and dialect. Incidentally, these page numbers in the pink here, they are the page numbers in the AQA textbook. When we looked at question 3, we made the point that the writer William Heselton seemed to be conflating accent and dialect, talking about them as if they were one thing, which kind of suggested that he himself is not a linguist. There is a big difference between accent and dialect, of course. Accent is phonological, so it's purely to do with the sound of the language, whereas dialect includes lexis, vocabulary, and grammar, and some people include phonological features as well. So accent and dialect are different then. So you could get some mileage out of explaining about those things. In terms of studies that I think would probably relate to this, good old William Labov and Peter Trudgill, both of those two did important studies about the linkage between language and social class. And William Labov's is particularly interesting because here it's talking about the language that's being used in department stores. And the original article was about Selfridges, so that would be quite interesting. So remember William Labov trudging around in the 1960s, various floors of New York department stores, some of them very upmarket, some middle market, some lower market. And he very much traced this relationship between people's accent features and their social class. And he was looking particularly at the post-vocalic R phoneme. So you could make some mention of that in some way. If you wanted to be closer to home, then you could refer to Peter Trudgill, who is trudging around an East Anglian town, Norwich, in the 1970s. And he too finds a very close correspondence between a person's accent features and their social class. In this case, he was focusing on the so-called velar nasal phoneme, which is the ng sound, as in walking. And he discovered from his data that almost entirely the middle classes are pronouncing this in an RP way. They're saying walking. And almost entirely what he's perceiving as the working classes are saying walkin'. They're doing an N sound rather than the velar nasal sound. So it seems from those sort of classic studies from the 1960s and the 1970s that your phonological features really betray your social class. I think maybe Giles's accommodation theory is a good one to refer to in the article as well, but not least because in Hanson's article, he talks about the need for social intelligence, by which he means kind of convergence, that, you know, you should tune in to your listener, listen to their accent, and then modify your language features accordingly, which is basically all about Giles's idea of either upward or downward convergence. So that's relevant. Given that there is talk a little bit about accents, for example, Hanson talks about the not so subtle Mancunian accent, there is some mileage maybe in making some observations about the actual linguistic difference, phonological differences between some of these regional accents, and you'll find a little bit of detail of that in the AQA textbook on page 161. And also in the textbook on page 163, you've got quite a lot of material there which is tracing people's attitudes towards RP on the one hand and regional accents on the other. For example, there is a poll that appeared in the Daily Telegraph that came up with the result that the coolest accent, according to the people that the Daily Telegraph polled, was Queen's English, where 20% of the respondents are saying that that was the best accent to use. And of course, down at the bottom is everybody's kicking boy, Brummie and West Country. Okay, so there's some interesting material on there. And of course, on those pages too, you've got details of Howard Giles's matched guys experiments, where he carefully sets up these experiments, which tries to monitor whether people do have these accent prejudices. And even though it's a kind of old piece of data, because it's way back in the 1970s, there's some interesting findings that come through there, certainly about people's perceptions towards standard English, or RP, compared with regional accents like Brummie. And on those pages, on page 164, then you've got lots of other research about attitudes towards regional accents. For example, there's Dixon, Mahoney and Cox with the match guys approach to see if there was a correlation between the accent and how we perceive someone's guilt, amongst others. So you've got plenty of material in there, given that you've only got sort of 40 minutes writing time, plenty of stuff that you could include in there. And there may well be other things that you can think of that relate just as well to those articles. Okay, so I said that a third of the mark was AO5. And so these are these good old stylistic features that you've just been including in your coursework piece, your article that you've been writing. So let's just remind ourselves of, if we're writing a successful article, what are the stylistic features that you're going to be including? First of all, you do need some kind of clever headline. Obviously, it needs to be compressed. It may well be that you ask a question, or there's some play on words. There needs to be something that grabs the attention of a passing reader. You then need a byline, which is usually supplied in these sorts of publications by somebody who's not the writer. So it's an editorial detail, and the byline usually summarises exactly which way you're going to be arguing. You need obviously some kind of very engaging start. Your start may be a visual image, it may contain some humour, there may be some kind of intertextual reference or pragmatics going on, it may pose a question. It needs to be interactive and interesting at the beginning. I would recommend that you use short, quite punchy paragraphs in order to maintain the interest of your reader. And I would also say, of course, that there needs to be variety in sentence forms, by which I mean not just declaratives that you're writing in, but also tossing in occasional interrogatives, sometimes imperatives, and varying very much your sentence types and sentence lengths. So, for example, occasionally putting in a minor sentence. You need cohesion. So you need all sorts of cohesive devices which are going to glue together bits of the writing. So an obvious example would be putting a question at the end of a paragraph so that the writer is led on to read the beginning of the next paragraph. Humour is good. So you might create humorous effects by doing some kind of deliberate shifts in register to lighten the tone. Obviously, you need a range of vocabulary, so you don't want to be repeating the same word, like a key word in a paragraph. You don't want to be repeating it more than once. So think of different synonyms that you can use to keep the expression really interesting. And as I was saying before, because this is a non-specialist reader that you've got, you can't make assumptions that they're going to know about some of the linguistic AO2 information that you're going to feed them. So you can't just say Howard Giles's accommodation theory says blah, blah, because your reader doesn't know who Howard Giles is. So instead, you're going to have to gloss it and say something like, it was a British linguist by the name of Howard Giles who invented the grandly titled accommodation theory. His research focused on the way we slip and slide between formal and more informal forms of lingo, depending on our listener. So there you've got your explanation. It's not dumbing down exactly, but you've got a kind of lower level of register than something that you would have if you were writing an essay. And notice the variety in forms there. Instead of saying the word language, this writer has put the word lingo in order to give variety. So these are the AO5 stylistic features that you need to be including. Here's an example of a beginning. So here's a headline, accentuating the positive. So some wordplay going on there. It's signalling to the reader that this is going to be an article which is about people's regional accents. And it's also summarising the stance as well, because unusually maybe in a piece of journalism, it's saying actually regional accents are a good thing. Paul Heselton argues that regional accents and dialects should be celebrated, not condemned. So there you are, you've got your name there at the beginning, and then it very clearly summarises which way you're going to be arguing, with a little bit of antithesis going on there, saying it should be celebrated, not condemned. All one sentence, nice and punchy. It seems that William Hanson, Huffington Post's go-to social commentator, is now huffing about regional speech. The self-appointed etiquette expert sides with Selfridge's bosses, who have recently outlawed the Mancunian twang on their premises, fearful of flummoxing their well-heeled cosmopolitan clientele. Heaven forbid that the local staff might sound like those frightful Coronation Street extras. And if the workers are less than happy, then Hanson helpfully suggests that they look elsewhere for employment. Right, I'm just manipulating the image there. So quite an engaging opening there. You've clearly got the reference back to the principal article from question 3, where it's naming the writer William Hanson. It's saying which publication that he was writing in. It's quoting from the article. So it's kind of ironically making fun of his moniker of social commentator and etiquette expert. And it's kind of summarising his stance. Says that the self-appointed etiquette expert sides with Selfridge's bosses, who've recently outlawed the Mancunian twang on their premises, fearful of flummoxing their well-heeled, etc. So we've got quite a lot of ironic humour being used here, and we've got that kind of variety that I talked about before that's necessary. So instead of saying accent all the time, because you've already used that in the headline, why not use a variety? Why not use the word twang, for example? So we're kind of lowering the level of register a little bit. You'll notice here that we've got a sentence that begins with a coordinating connective and. So in terms of Yaus's levels of formality, we're probably in that kind of consultative level. So it's establishing a kind of relationship, a kind of informal relationship with the reader. We go on. Etiquette expert he may well be, but on linguistic issues, he has much to learn. For a start, Hanson conflates accent and dialect, two very different beasts. Accent, of course, is pronunciation. Any linguist will tell you that no one regional accent is superior to another. The Bristolian twang that Hanson is keen to abandon is no worse than the Queen's English he proudly imagines himself to speak. The supposedly superior received pronunciation is just another English accent like Geordie, Scouse or Estuary English. True, RP carries some people's idea of social prestige, which seems to justify Hanson's and Selfridge's discrimination against non-RP speakers. Accent prejudice, as noted by the regional accent expert Peter Trudgill, is alive and kicking. So there's a lot of stuff going on in there. There's that the difference between accent and dialect being explained there, and then the point that's being made that a linguist would say that actually no one accent is better, linguistically better than another. Sure, some of accents seem to carry some kind of social prestige, but purely from a linguistic point of view, you know, RP is no better or no worse than Geordie or Scouse or any other kind of accent. Okay, so there's an argument that you're putting through here where you're truly kind of assessing the ideas that came through on text A and B, and you're putting forward your own points of view. Newspaper surveys repeatedly present league tables of regional accent popularity. According to a recent Daily Telegraph poll, Queen's English, Scottish and Geordie are all Champions League contenders for the coveted title of coolest accent, while poor old Brommy routinely languishes at the bottom of the table. So this is the information that I referred to earlier on page 163 in the textbook about people's perceptions towards accent. So that's the style that you want to be trying to achieve, where you're banging in lots of AO2 knowledge, linguistic concepts, but you're writing it in a really sort of interesting style of writing. Okay, so I will leave it there. And what I'd say to you is you want to have a go at doing that yourself. So just as you had a go at writing some paragraphs in answer to the question 3 that was given to you, why not have a go at doing a question 4? you can use some of the ideas that I've put forward there and build upon it in order to do your own complete answer. And let's see what you come up with. Thanks very much for listening to this. Thank you.